MMA Boxing Talk here. This is a quick award video for Fighter of the Year, Fighter of the Decade, and I just so happen to have the same guy winning both. Now, before I get into it, this is a subjective uh, type thing, right? I mean, if someone comes along and says, no, Manny Pacquiao wasn't Fighter of the Year, I had Neo Inoue or Canelo or Spence winning Fighter of the Year or Josh Taylor, I wouldn't argue or have a whole lot of problem with it. Um, I'm going to give my case and the reason why I have Manny Pacquiao Fighter of the Year and Fighter of the Decade. I'll get into Fighter of the Year first. What he did to Keith Thurman, that was such an amazing performance by a 40-year-old. Manny Pacquiao became the oldest welterweight champion in boxing history. And he became the fifth man over the age of 40 years old to win a world title, a legitimate world title. And he did it against an undefeated Keith Thurman. And yes, Thurman might not have been as active years coming up to that fight. The last 2 years, Thurman hasn't been fighting a whole lot. But I was following social media. He was training and taking this fight so seriously. By far, since he's been at the championship level, I don't think he's ever trained harder than for this Pacquiao fight. I was watching his Instagram live chat stories. He was working his ass off. And Manny Pacquiao, I mean, it was a good close fight. It was one of the best fights of the year. But Pacquiao clearly won that fight. And that was such an impressive performance. That alone warrants the Fighter of the Year. To do something that spectacular at the age of 40, like I said, the oldest welterweight champion in boxing history, and only the fifth man to become world champ over 40 years old. That is so historic. That is so impressive. To me, that warrants the award of Fighter of the Year. That's my opinion. Like I said, Canelo, Spence, Inoue, Josh Taylor, all these guys also had a great year. Let me know who you have in the comments below. I love these discussions, Fighter of the Year, Knockout of the Year, Fight of the Year. It makes for fun debate, and it's always interesting, and it kind of at the same time recaps the year that was. Kind of refreshes your memory sometimes. There's so much happening at the beginning of the year. You kind of forget things that happen. So I always like doing these videos. Now, I know that's only one win. Manny Pacquiao also beat Broner, which, not the craziest thing. But all the other guys on the list, Josh Taylor, I think, is the exception, where he had two amazing wins against Baranchek and Regis Prograis. The Prograis fight was one of the best fights of the year. Inoue, he had one of the best fights of the year against Nonito Donaire, who's an older guy, who's a lot bigger, more experienced, mind you. That was an amazing fight. I can't think off the top of my head the other wins Inoue had, but Donaire was his big win of the year. Spence, of course, beat Mikey Garcia. That was a guy coming up multiple weight classes, so that is what it is. But the Porter fight was one of the best fights of the year. That's Spence's best win, in my opinion. He showed a lot of dog in that fight. And Canelo, had two decent wins. Of course, Danny Jacobs, he did well against him. Winning a title in the fourth division against Kovalev. I know with the 168-pound fight with Fielding's not, a legit title or whatever, but that was impressive what he did to Kovalev. And Kovalev, of course, wasn't, the top guy. He was definitely picking the weakest champion out of the bunch, but still takes balls to do, in my opinion, because he didn't have to do that. He could have fought someone else, someone smaller, someone with less risk, but he got it done. So all those guys you can make a strong case for. That's all I'm saying. But I got Pacquiao, and mainly because that Thurman win was so impressive to do it against an undefeated, bigger, stronger guy. So that, to me, was great. Now, Fighter of the Decade, I got Pacquiao as well, and this is another one you can make a strong case for. You can make a strong case for Canelo Alvarez being Fighter of the Decade. has so many good wins during that time. Triple G, another guy, this guy was on a hell of a run. Um, and he did all of his work in this decade, the 2010 to 2019 decade. Andre Ward's another honorable mention. Vladimir Klitschko did a lot of good work in the first half of that decade, and even fought Joshua. It was the fight of the year in 2017, even though he lost. Still showed that he's still elite at like 42 or whatever, 41, whatever how old he was. Roman Gonzalez, Chocolatito, he's another guy, he was pound for pound number one for a while. He accomplished a lot during that time, during that decade as well. But and obviously Floyd Mayweather, you can't leave his name off the list. He went 8-0 during this decade. Pacquiao, he's my pick. And yes, you're going to say he got knocked out during this decade. He lost to Floyd Mayweather. He lost to Tim Bradley, which was bullshit. He won about 10 or 11 of those rounds. One of the worst robberies, and not worst robberies, but it was just so clear Bradley wasn't winning any of these rounds. Pacquiao was outworking him, outlanding him. Like, just mind-blowing. I remember that was one of the first pay-per-views I ever ordered, and I was just like, I can't believe this happens in boxing. This was the beginning of me realizing the dark side of boxing. But anyway, but Manny Pacquiao, very, very active, has a lot of good wins. Starts off with Claudio Margarito, which was his 8th division title. Margarito came in I think 17 to 20 pounds more than Pacquiao. Pacquiao, one of his best performances, just destroyed him. Shane Mosley, he beat Marquez in 2011. The bad decision loss to Bradley, who's an undefeated fighter at that time. Of course, he got the Marquez KO, which was brutal. But a year later, he bounced back, beats Rios, and then proceeds in 2014 to beat 2 undefeated fighters. Bradley takes his O. Bradley was 31-0. That's another guy who possibly could be another nominee for Fighter of the Decade, because when he was active there, when you go back 2, 3, 4 years ago, he was at that time, had one of the best records in boxing. He was always fighting the best. Just a true warrior. Pacquiao beat him twice. Should have beat him all 3 times. It should have never happened. A trilogy, but it is what it is. So he bounces back after the knockout to Marquez, beats 2 undefeated guys, Bradley and Algieri, and had some okay wins. Matisse, whatever, Broner, of course, lost to Mayweather in there as well. But the Thurman, to cap it off with the Thurman win, like I said in the beginning of the video, oldest welterweight champion in boxing history, and only the 5th man to become champion over the age of 40 years old. So he started off the decade winning that 8th title against Margarito, and he ends the decade beating an undefeated Keith Thurman, staying on top, staying relevant, fighting the elite the whole way through, for the most part, much more than Floyd Mayweather, because, for example, Mayweather has guys like, Robert Guerrero, who was a much... he fought, I think, at 140. That's where he had the most of his success, possibly even smaller than that. He was pulling him up. Alvarez, Canelo, you can't take anything away from that. But, you got to mention, Canelo was 22. He was definitely green. It's not the Canelo of today that Floyd beat. Let's be clear about that. Maidana twice. He fought guys like Andre Berto, Conor McGregor. Like, Manny Pacquiao never fought those type of guys. So, of course, he's going to have a few more losses, whatever. Floyd Mayweather is not, and this is not anything to do with Floyd or Manny, but this is just facts. Like, you don't see Floyd Mayweather at the age of 40 years old fighting undefeated guys like a Keith Thurman, So that says a lot right there. Like I said, Floyd went 8-0. Manny went 12-4. But Manny had twice the amount of fights during that time. He was more active. He accomplished more higher impressive feats during that era, becoming an 8th division champ, beating Keith Thurman at the age of 40. That's my case. Like I said, you can make a good case for all these guys, like I mentioned. I just wanted to give my 2 cents. And I love this debate, and it's really cool how it's the end of the decade, because that's a real review of the last 10 years, the last decade. So that's pretty special. You know, you don't, that doesn't come around too often, right? The fight of the years every year, that's fun, but fight of the decade, that's one I'll have to do some homework on. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm really curious to see what you guys have to say, who your fighter of the year, fighter of the decade is. Leave it down below. If you like the video, subscribe. Peace.